On September 1st, 1939, Germany unleashed a coordinated strike on Poland. Panzer tanks rolling, Luftwaffe dive bombers screaming overhead, Kriegsmarine guns firing from the sea, and the Waffen-SS preparing behind the lines. These four pillars of German military power, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Waffen-SS, would each play a fearful role in the war to come. At the very heart of Germany's military was the Heer, the army. Made up of the vast majority of German manpower, the Heer was the main tool of conquest, the force that steamrolled borders and occupied nations with terrifying speed. During World War II, a staggering 13.6 million men would serve in its ranks, forming the largest and most influential part of the German armed forces, known as the Wehrmacht. So, what made the Heer so powerful? Its strength was built on a revolutionary doctrine, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a whole new philosophy of combat that blended traditional German military ideas with modern tech. The core concept was to use speed and surprise to punch through enemy lines at a single weak point, the Schwerpunkt, or center of gravity. Instead of getting bogged down in grinding frontal assaults, German forces would bypass strongholds, create chaos in the enemy's rear, and encircle entire armies. This strategy depended on the tight coordination of combined arms, panzer divisions, motorized infantry, and, critically, air support. The panzer divisions were the armored fist of the Heer. While other nations often spread their tanks out among infantry units, the Germans concentrated them into powerful independent formations. These divisions, backed by mechanized infantry called Panzer Grenadiers, could move with shocking speed and freedom. A typical German infantry squad was built around its machine gun. In the early war, primarily the MG-34. These guns had exceptionally high rates of fire, letting German squads lay down a storm of suppressive fire that far outclassed their Allied counterparts. This doctrine of fire and maneuver, where the machine gun pinned the enemy down while riflemen advanced, was ruthlessly effective. The legendary MG-42, with its even higher rate of fire, was introduced later in 1942 to supplement and replace the MG-34. Nowhere was the power of the Heer more obvious than during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. In the first few months, German army groups sliced through Soviet defenses, capturing millions of prisoners and advancing hundreds of miles. But the sheer vastness of the Eastern Front and the brutal Russian winter would expose the Heer's fatal flaw: logistics. The German army was a strange mix of the 20th and 19th centuries. While its panzer divisions were the peak of modern warfare, most of its supply trains still relied on horses. This logistical nightmare, combined with Hitler's increasingly erratic meddling in military command, would ultimately grind the Heer's advance to a halt right before the gates of Moscow, setting the stage for a brutal war of attrition it simply couldn't win. While the Heer was the backbone of the German war machine on land, at sea, a very different kind of war was being waged by the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. Hugely outnumbered by Britain's Royal Navy, the Kriegsmarine could never really hope to win a traditional fleet-on-fleet battle. Its strategy had to be one of disruption and strangulation. Its main job? To cut the Allied lifeline across the Atlantic, the convoy routes that supplied Great Britain with food, fuel, and war materials. The primary weapon for this was the U-boat. Under the command of Admiral Karl Dönitz, the German submarine force cooked up a devastating tactic known as the Wolf Pack, or Rudeltaktik. The idea was simple but deadly. Instead of single subs hunting alone, they'd form long patrol lines across suspected convoy routes. When a U-boat spotted a convoy, it wouldn't attack right away. It would shadow the target, radioing its position back to headquarters. Dönitz and his staff would then guide other U-boats in the area to converge on the convoy from multiple directions. Once the pack was together, The attack would begin, often at night and on the surface, where the U-boats were faster and harder to spot. This created absolute chaos among the escort ships, letting multiple subs slip through and wreak havoc on the defenseless merchant vessels. The early years of the Battle of the Atlantic, from 1940 to 1942, became known as the happy time for U-boat crews as they sank Allied ships with terrifying efficiency. Beyond the U-boat arm, the Kriegsmarine also had a small but powerful surface fleet, epitomized by its state-of-the-art battleships. The most famous was the Bismarck. Launched in 1939, it was a fearsome symbol of German naval ambition. In May 1941, the Bismarck set out on its first and only mission, to break out into the Atlantic and raid Allied convoys. During the Battle of the Denmark Strait, it scored a stunning victory, sinking the pride of the Royal Navy, HMS Hood, in minutes. But this triumph didn't last long. Damaged in the fight, the Bismarck was relentlessly hunted by nearly the entire British home fleet. Crippled by a torpedo from an old biplane Swordfish aircraft that jammed its rudder, the mighty battleship was cornered and pounded by British warships. On May 27, 1941, while the crew did attempt to scuttle the ship, it was the overwhelming British firepower that sealed its fate. The Bismarck sank, and just over 110 of its 2,200-man crew survived. The sinking of the Bismarck was a huge blow to German morale and marked a turning point, proving that even the most powerful battleships were vulnerable to coordinated air and naval power. The third pillar of Germany's armed forces was the Luftwaffe, the Air Force. Officially created in 1935 under Hermann Göring, a World War I ace and one of Hitler's closest cronies, the Luftwaffe grew into one of the largest and most modern air forces in the world. While numerically smaller than the Soviet Air Force by 1940, its technology and battle-hardened pilots made it arguably the most effective. It was absolutely key to the early successes of the Blitzkrieg, acting as flying artillery for the Heer. The Luftwaffe's doctrine was all about close air support for ground troops. Its most iconic aircraft, the Junkers Ju-87, or Stuka, was a dive bomber made for precision strikes on enemy strongpoints, tanks, and artillery. The Stuka's creepy inverted gull wings and the terrifying wind-powered siren it used during its dives became a symbol of German air power and a potent psychological weapon. In Poland and France, Stukas and medium bombers like the Heinkel He-111 cleared the way for the Panzers, destroying command centers and creating panic. All the while, nimble fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 swept the skies of enemy planes, achieving total air superiority. The Luftwaffe's first big test, however, would also be its first big failure: the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940. After the fall of France, Hitler planned to invade Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, but this could only work if the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over the English Channel. Göring promised Hitler the Royal Air Force could be wiped out in a few weeks. For months, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids, first against shipping, then RAF airfields, and finally against British cities in the bombing campaign known as the Blitz. But they seriously underestimated their opponent. The RAF's sophisticated command and control system, which included radar, allowed them to manage their resources and effectively meet German raids. Plus, the Luftwaffe simply wasn't built for a long-range strategic air war. Its bombers lacked the defensive firepower for deep raids, and its starfighter, the Bf-109, had such limited fuel it could only fight for a few minutes over England before having to turn back. In the end, the Luftwaffe couldn't break the RAF, and the failure to gain air superiority forced Hitler to cancel the invasion for good. The Battle of Britain exposed the limits of the Luftwaffe's doctrine and leadership, a blow from which it never truly recovered. The fourth and most notorious pillar of Germany's military power was the Waffen-SS. It's important to get this straight. The Waffen-SS was not an official branch of the Wehrmacht, like the Army or Navy. It was the armed wing of the Nazi Party's own Schutzstaffel, or SS. It grew from Hitler's personal bodyguard into a massive multi-divisional force that fought alongside the regular army. Its relationship with the Wehrmacht was complicated and often tense, full of competition for the best men and equipment, and a culture clash between traditionalist army generals and the fanatical SS leadership. At first, recruits had to meet the Nazis' strict Aryan racial criteria and were pumped full of intense ideological indoctrination. The Waffen-SS saw itself as an elite group of political soldiers, bound by a personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler himself. This fanaticism, combined with getting priority access to top-tier equipment, often made them incredibly effective on the battlefield. Divisions like the Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf earned a reputation as tenacious, hard-fighting units, often used as fire brigades to plug gaps in the line or spearhead critical attacks on the Eastern Front. The German military wasn't one unified machine. It was four powerful, often rival factions: Heer, Kriegsmarine, Luftwaffe, and Waffen-SS. Each had strengths, flaws, and rivalries that shaped the war. Which branch do you think had the biggest impact? Comment below, like and subscribe for more military history.